Warning, this podcast contains descriptions of murder, torture and abuse. As a result, it may not be suitable for everybody. Detroit, Michigan, USA, Part 2 of Hometown Murders. Detroit, birthplace of the automobile industry, home to the three major manufacturing giants, Ford, Fiat, Chrysler and General Motors. Listen to part 2 and the murder of Vincent Chin, beaten by Chrysler plant supervisor Ronald Evans and his stepson Michael Nitz, the death of Malice Green, a resident of Detroit, died after being assaulted by Detroit PD officers, and Lawrence Horn, an American musician and former record producer and engineer for Motown Records. Before we start part 2, Hometown Murders, please listen to part 1. It's not essential, they're 3 separate cases. However, if you prefer it linearly, please listen beforehand. However, you don't have to if you don't want to. You can just jump into part 2 and you're not missing anything. As always, please do some homework for us. Leave a 5-star rating and a review, really helps the show. Share, subscribe, listen to our back catalogue, tell your friends and engage us on social media. Thank you. The first case is the murder of Vincent Chin. He was born May 18th, 1955 and was a Chinese-American draftsman. He was beaten to death by 2 white men, Chrysler plant supervisor Ronald Evans and his stepson laid-off auto worker Michael Nitz. Evans and Nitz assailed Chin following a brawl that took place at a strip club in Highland Park, Michigan, Detroit, where Chin had been celebrating his bachelor party with friends in advance of his upcoming wedding. They apparently assumed Chin was of Chinese or Japanese descent and are alleged to have used racial slurs as they attacked him. Evans and Nitz blamed him for the success of Japanese auto industry, despite the fact that Chin was of Chinese descent. At the time, Metro Detroit was a powder keg of racial animosity towards Asian Americans, specifically as the penetration of Japanese automotive imports in the US. The imports into the US domestic market hastened the climb of Detroit's Big Three. Resentful workers laid the blame for recent layoffs on Japanese competition. Chin was taken to Henry Ford Hospital in Detroit, where a nurse told his childhood friend that he had no chance and that his brain was dead. He died of his injuries 4 days later. Evans and Nitz was charged with second-degree murder, but bargained the charges down to manslaughter and pleaded guilty in 1983. They were ordered to pay just $3,000 and serve 3 years probation with no jail time. While Evans and Nitz never denied the brawl, they claimed the fight was not racially motivated and they said they did not use racial epithets. The lenient sentence led to a vocal outcry from Asian Americans. The president of the Detroit Chinese Welfare Council said it amounted to $3,000 license to kill. As a result, the case has been viewed as a critical turning point in Asian American civil rights engagement and a rally cry for a stronger federal hate crime legislation. Chin was born on May 18, 1955, in the Guangdong province, China. He was the only child of Bing Hing David Chin and Lily Chin. His father earned the right to bring a Chinese bride into the United States through his service in World War II. After Lily suffered a miscarriage in 1949 and was unable to have children, the couple adopted Vincent from a Chinese orphanage in 1961. Throughout most of the 1960s, Chin grew up in Highland Park. In 1971, after the elderly Hing was mugged, the family moved to Oak Park, Michigan. Vincent Chin graduated from Oak Park High School in 1973, going on to study Controlled Data Institute. At the time of his death, he was employed as an industrial draftsman at Efficient Engineering, an automotive supplier, as well as working weekends as a waiter at the former Golden Star restaurant in Ferndale, Michigan. He was engaged and the wedding date was set for June 28, 1982. On the 9th of June 1982, a fight occurred at the Fancy Pants Street Club on Woodward Avenue in Highland Park, where Chin was having his bachelor party. The group was thrown out after a heated exchange in words, subsequently parting ways. Evans allegedly instigated the incident by declaring, "It's because of you little motherfuckers that we're out of work," referring to US auto manufacturing jobs having been lost to Japan, particularly referring to sales of Chrysler rebadged Mississippis as captive imports, assuming the Chinese-American Chin as Japanese. Chin taunted Evans to keep fighting after they were thrown out. Evans and Nitz searched the neighbourhood for 20 to 30 minutes and even paid another man $20 to help look for Chin, before finding him at a McDonald's restaurant. Chin tried to escape but was held down by Nitz, while Evans repeatedly bludgeoned Chin with a baseball bat until Chin's head cracked open. A policeman who witnessed the beating said Evans was swinging the bat like he was swinging for a home run. When rushed to Henry Ford Hospital, Chin was unconscious and died 4 days later after a coma on June 23, 1982. Chin was interred at Detroit's Forest Lawn Cemetery. In September 1987, Chin's mother, Lily Chin, moved from Oak Park back to her hometown in Zhangzhou, China, to avoid being reminded of the tragedy. She returned to the United States for medical treatment in late 2001 and died on the June 9, 2002. Prior to her death, Lily Chin had established a scholarship in Vincent's memory to be administered by the American Citizens for Justice. The attack was considered by many as a hate crime, but predated hate crime laws in the United States. Nevertheless, during a 1998 House Representatives hearing on the Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 1997, Congressman John Conyers, who was an Afro-American, suggested the problem in making people sufficiently aware of the causes for and the injustice of Chin's case was that it was a great political hot potato that did not get picked up for political reasons with respect to the automobile industry. Chin's case has been cited by some Asian Americans support the idea they are not seen as fully citizens or perpetual followers compared to real Americans. Lily Chin stated, quote, "What kind of law is this? What kind of justice? This happened because my son is Chinese. If 2 Chinese killed a white person, they must go to jail, maybe for their whole lives. Something is wrong with this country." End quote. In 2010, the city of Ferndale, Michigan erected a legal milestone marker at Woodward and 9 Mile commemorating the murder of Chin to ensure that his story is not forgotten. The second hometown murders case we're looking at is the death of Malice Green. April 29, 1957, was born and was a resident of Detroit, who died after being assaulted by PD officers Walter Buntzin and Larry Nevers on November 5, 1992. Both officers were later convicted for Green's death. The official cause of death was ruled to be blunt force trauma to his head. Buntzin and Nevers were patrolling in Detroit in plain clothes in an unmarked vehicle. Green had pulled up to a house known for drug activity. Buntzin asked Green for his driver's license, and Green then walked around to the passenger side of the car and sat in the passenger seat of the car with his legs out the doorway. Green looked through the glove compartment and then grabbed something from the car's floor. Bunsen asked Green to let go of the object. Green allegedly failed to relinquish a vial of crack cocaine. After refusing to let go, Nevers struck Green in the head with his flashlight approximately 7 to 14 times. During the struggle, which according to the official autopsy resulted in death, after the struggle, Green was transported to a local hospital for treatment for the head injuries sustained in the struggle, where he died. A subsequent report presented by experts testifying for the defence of the trial stated that Green died of a heart failure caused in part by an enlarged heart due to years of substance abuse and aggravated by the police with the struggle. Green was black and the two officers were white and decorated, though with a history of excessive force complaints. The incident occurred only months after the Los Angeles riots in 1992, which protested the acquittal of police officers in the videotape beating of Rodney King. Prior to jury selection, Detroit Mayor Coleman A. Young stated that Green was literally murdered by police on national television. The coroner's report was done by Dr. Cahill Jaraki, the most junior coroner in the department. It was alleged by the defence that his report was rushed due to workload and his impending evacuation. The autopsy showed cuts to the scalp as well as subarachnoid hemorrhage and brain contusions. However, there was no skull fractures and no other bone fragments. Green's heart was enlarged and the arteries hardened. Toxicology results ultimately showed that Green had a cocaine level of 0.50 micrograms. Jaraki concluded that death was caused by blunt force trauma, which caused swelling of the brain. Jaraki testified in Bunsen and Nevers' trial that the damage was done by, quote, 14 blunt force traumas to the head, end quote. He stated that his boss, Dr. Bader Kassim, agreed that Green's drug consumption was as, quote, insignificant as the colour of his eyes, end quote, in relation to the cause of his death. However, under cross-examination, Jaraki testified there was no swelling noted in the report, nor any fractures to the skull. In the trial of Sergeant Douglas, Jaraki reduced the number of blows to 7, which fit with Nevers' testimony. And as Nevers' second trial, Dr. Kassim testified that he examined the body of the day after Dr. Jaraki made his examination. This second exam was never disclosed to the defence prior to or during the first trial, and that the drugs played a major part in Green's death. After the second trial, Jaraki sued the coroner's office, claiming that he was pressurised by his superiors to change his finding to state that cocaine contributed to Green's death, which he refused to do so, which would have supported the police officer's defence. He was awarded $2.5 million. The coroner's officer later alleged during the civil trial that Jaraki was fired for supposed mental instability and absenteeism. Dr. Jaraki's testimony was supported by the prosecution's paid medical expert, Dr. Michael Baden. After the trial, Baden allegedly told a pathologist conference that he came to his conclusions based on information surrounding the circumstances of Green's death and the facts in the exam. Bunsen and Nevers' defence presented 3 experts, one of whom stipulated that they identified 11 blunt force injuries to Green's head. However, they testified that Green's head injuries were entirely superficial and could not have caused his death. They noted that Green had no fractures, no significant bleeding or bruising of the brain, and no swelling of the brain. It was their opinion that Green died as a result of cocaine and alcohol abuse, combined with his physical struggle with the police as he resisted arrest and the minor head injuries. They stated these things in combination caused a surge of adrenaline which overloaded the electrical circuit in Green's brain, resulting in brain seizure, respiratory failure, cardiac arrest and death. Judge George W. Crockett III in Detroit recalled his court presided over the court trial. Bunsen and Nevers were tried together in Detroit after the judge denied a change of venue. The coroner did not disclose the second exculpatory report to the defence. The appeals during the noted, quote, the civilian witnesses for the prosecution all had either consumed alcohol or cocaine sometime before witnessing the exchange. 3 of them were friends with Green, which were Fletcher, Hollins and Pace, and there was a suggestion from their testimony that they had reason to dislike these officers, end quote. Bunsen and Nevers were not given separate trials, but were allowed separate juries. Both juries were composed of a majority of black citizens, 2 white people on Nevers' jury, 1 on Bunsen's, and both juries reached unanimous verdicts. During the trial, movies were provided for the jurors' entertainment while they were sequestered, including the film Malcolm X. The film depicts scenes of police brutality being perpetuated by white police officers, including the recent beating of Rodney King. It also contains a voiceover that claims white police officers are the direct descendants of the Ku Klux Klan. Both juries were shown the film on at least 2 separate occasions during the trial. The testimony of the responding EMTs was very damaging to Bunsen and Nevers' case. All of them testified that Green was covered with blood and he was hanging from the driver's side door when they arrived. The EMTs further said that Nevers struck Green in the head with a heavy police flashlight repeatedly, even though Green was not offering any significant resistance. Both of them stated that Nevers told Green to open his hands and hold still, and they said that he did not. Nevers hit him with the flashlight. They described Green as dazed and stuporous during the incident, saying that Green was uttering only a few words like wait, while Nevers was striking him. Lee Hardy, one of the responding EMTs, testified during the separate assault trial for Robert Lesnar that he witnessed the former officer kicking Green in the head while he lay prone on the street. The city of Detroit paid a civil agreement of $5.25 million to Malice Green's family. Officers Nevers, Bunsen, Robert Lesnar and Freddie Douglass was charged in the death. Ultimately, charges against Sergeant Douglass were dropped. Lesnar was acquitted of assault. On August 23, 1993, the jury found Bunsen and Nevers guilty of second-degree murder. 2 months later, Nevers was sentenced to serve 12 to 25 years in prison, and Bunsen was sentenced to serve a lighter sentence of 8 to 18 years in prison. In 2007, Larry Nevers wrote a self-publicised book titled Good Cops, Bad Verdict. He died February 2013. On July 31st, 1997, the Michigan Supreme Court granted a new trial for Walter Bunsen, mostly on the grounds of showing the movie Malcolm X to the jury members while they waited to begin deliberating. It was learned that a political appointee of Mayor Young had made it onto the jury, and she was instrumental in showing the movie to jury members. Bunsen was immediately released from prison. He was retired, and on March 19, 1998, he was again found guilty of involuntary manslaughter, and in January 1999, Court of Appeals reinstated his 4-year prison sentence. He had already served the minimum under the first conviction and was released. Larry Nevers' 1997 appeal to the Michigan Supreme Court was denied. However, he was successful in his appeal to a federal court which overturned the verdict in 1999. It cited the showing of Malcolm X as well as jury members hearing of preparations in case of riots should the officers be acquitted. This decision was appealed to the US Supreme Court, which it let stand. Nevers was convicted of involuntary manslaughter in May 2000. He was sentenced to 7 to 15 years in prison. In March 2003, this conviction was overturned by Michigan Court of Appeals, but in September 2003, the Supreme Court upheld this conviction. In April 2005, Nevers lost a bid to appeal the conviction in federal court. During this process, Nevers was treated for lung cancer and was released in 2001 to serve the rest of his sentence at home. The last case we'll look at is Lawrence Horn, L.T. Horn, born 1939. was an American musician, former record producer and chief recording engineer for Motown Records in Detroit and Los Angeles. He later served a life sentence for hiring a hitman to murder his ex-wife, Mildred Horn, their disabled son Trevor, and nurse Janice Sanders. The case quickly gained national interest and went on to prompt a lawsuit with Paladin Press, the publishers of book Hitman, a technical manual for independent contractors, which had been used as a how-to manual by the killer. Horn gained experience working as a disc jockey on the USS Lake Champlain radio station. He began working with Motown Records in Detroit during their heyday in the early 1960s as a sound engineer. He was the chief technician for artists such as The Temptations, Junior Walker and the All-Stars. Horn left Motown in 1968 to join a company owned by former Motown songwriting team Holland, Dozier and Holland, with which he stayed throughout the 1970s until he left to become an independent producer. In 1983 he went back to Motown until he was laid off in 1990. After a brief one-year marriage to Motown receptionist Joanna Royster in the late 60s, Horn moved to Los Angeles with Motown when in 1972 he met his second wife, Mildred Maury, during a first-class flight en route to Los Angeles. The couple married in Las Vegas in August 73 but separated in 79 and filed for divorce in 81. They continued a relationship via their daughter. In 1984, despite the ongoing divorce proceedings, Millie learned that she was pregnant with twins by Horn. The couple divorced in 1987. Horn was laid off by Motown in 1990 during a sale and reconstruction, and once the prosperous Horn slid into debt, particularly with $16,000 in overdue child support. In March 3rd, 1993, when the murders occurred, Horn's family consisted of his wife, Tiffany, daughter born 1974, Tamale, which was one of the twins born in 84, and Trevor, who was severely disabled and required continual nursing care. By late 1992, Horn had befriended James Perry via his cousin Thomas Turner and contracted him to kill his ex-wife, disabled 8-year-old son and the family's overnight nurse in their Lay Hill, Silver Spring, Maryland home. The murders were carried out at 2 a.m. on March 3rd, 1993. Both women had been shot multiple times in the head, and Trevor had been smothered by the killer, placing one hand over his tracheotomy, the other hand over his nose and mouth. Attempts had been made to portray the crime as a robbery gone wrong. Millie's sister, Vivian, who lived half a block away, and another neighbour discovered the bodies around 7:30 a.m. on March 3rd, 1993. The motive for hiring Detroit-based Perry to commit the murders was that Horn stood to gain $1.7 million from his son's trust fund, established after the settlement of a lawsuit resulting from a medical procedure on September 16, 1986, when he nearly died at just 2 years old. This left Trevor with brain damage and a quadriplegia. The death of his ex-wife also meant that Horn would be the sole beneficiary of the fund. Perry was sentenced to death in 1995 for the murders, and in 1996 Lawrence Horn was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of murder conspiracy and sentenced to life imprisonment. The case prompted a lawsuit in 1997 against the Paladin Press, the publishers of Hitman, a technical manual for independent contractors, which James Perry had used as a guide to execute the murders. The lawsuit was settled in 1999 when the publishers agreed to stop selling the book and pay millions of dollars in compensation to the family of the victims. Later, Perry's conviction was overturned by his appeals court, and a second trial in 2001 sentenced him to 3 life terms in Maryland's prison system. Perry died of an undisclosed illness in prison on December 30th, 2010. Horn died in prison February 2017. Thank you for everybody who's listened to this episode. This episode has been researched, written and hosted by me, Andrew Knight. Sound, music and editing has been provided by Harry Edmondson. Make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere where you listen to your podcast. This allows the episode to be downloaded automatically as soon as it's released. Please reach out to us on the social media. We're at Hometown Murders on Instagram, Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear from you. Please support the show by leaving a 5-star rating or a review. It really does help.